Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill sitting here Sunday morning. You would think by now, like I've learned not to doubt this Kirby Smart Georgia Bulldog program in the month of November. That's exactly what I did heading into this football game, where I looked at Georgia and said, yeah, not only is Carson Beck struggling at the quarterback spot, but this team is not as physically imposing along the line of scrimmage as we're used to seeing this Georgia team. Now, we always knew Georgia had this in them. We just haven't really seen it consistently from this team in 2024. You saw it for the last three quarters, Saturday night against Tennessee. Though this version of Georgia is one of the most dangerous teams in the country and certainly a national title caliber football team. Now the question is, like, can we see this version of Georgia in the back half of November going into the college football playoffs? That's kind of the conversation you're having with this Georgia program. Fired up to get into some of the big takeaways, I think most notably Carson Beck, like getting back to the 2023 version. Now, before we get into it, as always, Georgia fans, y'all can let me hear in the comment section. I spent a lot of this week talking about my doubts about this Georgia team. Y'all have been rocking with the fellas for a really long time. We appreciate y'all. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. I certainly do deserve it, Dill. Without further ado, I think we got to start with Carson Beck. What did you see from Carson Beck last night against Tennessee that you just haven't seen throughout the previous parts of 2024 here?
And I kind of want to talk about it in combination with the skill players because, frankly, I think all of them have left things to be desired. I don't think Carson Beck's played good enough. I don't think the guys on the boundary have played good enough, including the tight end room. I think today, again, you saw – again, they probably don't have that Brock Bowers type guy in this pass catching room right now, but you saw them really distribute the ball well. I think 5 guys had over 50 yards. You were getting to their skill sets and they were using them. And then at the end of the day, their wide receivers and tight ends were just winning one-on-one matches. Love it. Humphreys, like when the ball's in the air, they're making plays on it. And that's just not been something we've seen consistent enough. And I think that's hurt Carson Beck. I think Carson Beck hasn't played good enough in his own right. But again, I think you just saw that version of Georgia's offense where the ball was getting spread around nicely and they were making plays on it. And that's something we just need to do more.
I think there's a third aspect that I think's been letting Georgia down, and that's the offensive line. They were elite last night. This was an offensive line that 7 days ago got whipped by Ole Miss on the road. And you take a look at how they played last night, 0 sacks, only 2 tackles for loss. There were only 5 pressures on dropbacks with Carson Beck all night last night. That's a Tennessee front 7 that I think is one of the better pass rush units that you see in the entire country. Like, didn't even make an impact on this football game. So you had Carson Beck playing better. You had the pass catchers on the outside playing better, and the Georgia offensive line that we're all used to seeing. That's the recipe for Georgia on the offensive side of the football. Now, to me, diving into Carson Beck, Dill, I'll ask you this. Now, I'll ask the Georgia fans this too. Is this play turned around Georgia's season? I think that it was 3rd and 8. Georgia's in their own, I think inside their own 20. And you get a free play. And Carson Beck rips one up the seam to, I believe it was Dominic Lovett. That play, it like unlocked Carson Beck. I mean, up until that point in that football game, you're down 10-0. You're facing a 3rd and long. You make that play and something just switched for Carson Beck. And we got the Carson Beck that we saw in 2023. 2 things that stood out. One, that intermediate passing attack was absolute money, like 7 of 11 for $126. But I think more importantly, between the numbers, where we all know Carson Beck is absolutely lethal when he's playing his best football, 12 of 13 down the field between the numbers. That Carson Beck is the 2023 version of Carson Beck. You get that Carson Beck the rest of the year, this Georgia team is going to be an extremely tough out every single game of the season.
I mean, they got their tight ends rolling again. That was probably something you're always like, they needed to replace what Brock Bowers was giving them because it was such like a safety valve, and it was where Carson Beck, like when they weren't playing good, he always could get to that. It felt like that Auburn game is kind of the one that sticks out. It's like they play horrible offense for 3 quarters, and then it's like, all right, enough playing around. We're just going to go feed Brock Bowers through the middle. They started dominating. Again, you haven't really had, and frankly, I don't think that's all Carson Beck because I don't think you've had enough consistency out of the tight end position. I don't think Delp's always played good enough. Jurasic probably hasn't always given them enough at that spot. Lawson Lucky started to come on, but again, this was kind of the game. Like Oscar Delp really gave him a good football game. Aside from that one drop fumble, whatever you want to call it, I think it was a drop. I know the Tennessee fans don't agree. He's probably got to make that play, but other than that, he played a really good football game, and that was something like I think his play when he hasn't been on all year, it certainly hurt Carson Beck.
Yeah, we talked about this to begin 2024. Like the biggest question was how do you replace Brock Bowers and Ladd? And we kind of said I don't know if there's that true wide receiver one on this Georgia offense. It's going to have to be a committee. And what you said to start was kind of exactly what you were looking for. Like everybody's getting involved, but everybody's getting involved in manners where they thrive. You know what I mean? Like the tight ends working the seams, working the middle of the field, Lovely getting the ball in space, Arian Smith working vertically, getting the ball in space. They used all their different playmakers kind of the right way. And I think that's kind of how this Georgia offense has to look if it wants to reach its peak. You got to have everybody contributing on the outside. That's what we got. Carson Beck, offensive line playmakers. You get all three of those guys, those units, you might say, playing good football. That's what Georgia needs on offense. Now, going to the defensive side of the football, by far for me, the biggest storyline is Georgia was able to light box Tennessee and stop the run. You know, you look at Tennessee, they completed only 3 passes that traveled 10 plus yards down the field, didn't complete a single pass that traveled 20 plus yards down the field. Normally, when you're a defense playing this Tennessee offense, it's just a numbers game. You got to pick your poison. You know, if you want to leave your safeties high, Tennessee's going to run the football all over you. If you're going to bring your safeties in the box to stop the run, Tennessee's going to get explosive down the field. Georgia's one of those teams that they can light box Tennessee and stop the run. They did that pretty much consistently. I don't think there was many times where we're walking our safeties into the box. You stopped the run pretty well. You didn't give up the explosive play, and you created negative plays on defense, 5 sacks, 6 tackles for a loss. I know it just kind of emptied the clip on you in terms of my takeaways. Where do you want to dig in from this Georgia defense really playing some good football in the last 3 quarters of this football game?
I do think that was a really kind of nice plan that Kirby and Glenn Schumann put together. Because again, like they gave Tennessee some stuff underneath. They gave them a little bit in the run game, but nothing explosive. They tackled really well. And it's really hard to just execute your way down the field for 4 quarters. And I think you kind of saw that because obviously for the first quarter and a little bit into that second quarter, Tennessee's offense was kind of moving it. I think the way that they'd maybe be comfortable to an extent. But you look at some point, again, not a ton of explosives. They had the one long run, touchdown run that Dylan Sampson hit. But aside from that, nothing really big. And then you're right. The fundamental key is if you're going to play that way where you're going to give up some yards, you need to be able to, at timely moments, create a negative play and kind of knock Tennessee off their rhythm. And Georgia was able to do that. Again, you've seen when Tennessee can kind of just keep themselves on schedule, they can be really dangerous like they were in that first quarter and a little bit into the second. When Georgia started to create some negative plays, you really saw them disrupt what Tennessee wanted to do. And they really kind of shut them down.
When you stop this Tennessee vertical passing attack, it's really hard to do. And when you do it, you give Tennessee a lot of problems. Again, Tennessee, they only took 22 shots, 20 plus yards down the field. They drew a pass interference. They threw an incompletion. You just completely took away the deeper third for this Tennessee offense by leaving your safeties high. There's just not a lot of defenses that have the personnel to light box Tennessee and stop the run. Georgia was kind of one of those teams. We kind of knew that. The question was, could they? And they did. And I think the last part is that you kind of hinted at, and I think it's really important to mention, finally getting back to creating some negative plays in the front 7, 5 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. We've seen this version of Georgia's defense, I think most notably against Texas on the road a couple of weeks ago, but we haven't seen it consistently. There's been some outings for Georgia on defense where they're not smothering opponents. They're not creating those negative plays. They're not dominating the line of scrimmage. We're used to saying that consistently for Georgia over the last 3 years for this team. They got back to that this weekend. And Dill, I guess the question I want to close with is this version of Georgia, a legitimate national title caliber team. What says you there?
Well, and you knew they had that because, again, I'd still go back. That second half against Clemson, that's national championship level football. The problem is you've just seen it very few times over the course of
Yeah.
this year. Maybe a part of that Mississippi State game you saw it, but that's on a great team, so you kind of expect to kind of have
Yeah.
moments really good against them. But aside from that, maybe you could say the second half of Alabama, but I don't even know that I'd really go that far. It's again, like you knew they had that. You've seen good enough moments. Carson Beck plays this way. I think you get a better version of this defense because you get more complementary football. Again, that was something I think was an issue is that Carson Beck was putting this defense in a lot of bad spots where teams, again, I don't even know that Georgia got to be able to do exactly what they wanted to do. You saw when they were able to take a lead on this Tennessee team, Georgia was then really able to sit on that Tennessee offense. If Tennessee
Yeah.
kind of stays in the lead in that football game and Georgia's offense never takes off in that second quarter, I don't think this score looks particularly great for Georgia. I think Tennessee marches the ball a little bit. I think they can stay on schedule, do some of the things they want. So that's a good complementary football game from that Georgia team. And when they play that way, yeah, they can
Yeah,
certainly be a problem.
I think most people would say that road win against Texas was the most impressive outing for Georgia. It might be from a resume standpoint, like on the road against the top 5 team in the country, but from a pure football standpoint, this was the most complete game we've seen from
Even
Georgia
even
all year.
against Texas, it's not like you played great on offense if you're
No.
Georgia. Now that defense, like, yeah, that was like incredible Georgia defense that we know they can certainly play. But I didn't come away from that like, ooh, Carson Beck's like back. That's like they can
Yeah.
win with him playing that way because they can't win with him playing that way consistently enough. Today, you saw Carson Beck play football at a level that they can obviously beat anyone in the country very easily.
Yeah, I think Georgia fans have a lot to be excited about, and I just am such an idiot. You just can't doubt Kirby Smart in Georgia in late November. It's when they play the
I know
best
I
football
said
I've
I
ever
was
met.
like Vegas is so stupid. What are they giving them
But
11
you didn't
points?
even give a pick on Sunday. You just said I'm taking Tennessee, and I don't even need the points. We were, I mean, like, and again, like going into this game, there wasn't like a ton of reason to be totally confident in Georgia. And yeah, you can't doubt Kirby Smart like that. And we know that by now, but we still continue to make that mistake. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.